Let's get started. Good morning. Sorry. Morning, everyone. We're totally excited to be here and to talk to you about the new GovCMS, big project down from the Australian government. And today we'll talk about what's happened in the last wee while and what the changes are going to come through. So first of all, hello. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Tom Toogood. I'm originally from New Zealand, currently based in Melbourne, Australia, and I work as a platform engineer for Amazee.io. Been involved with Drupal for about 11, 12 years now. Been always a big supporter of open source. It's been really amazing to see the last few years and the changes that have taken place in the open source world. So first of all, a couple of questions to you guys. How many of you have heard of GovCMS? Pretty much, yeah, everyone. Nice. Okay. How many have heard of Docker and containers? Okay, a lot more. How about Kubernetes? Yeah, interesting. And how about Amazee.io? Awesome. So we've got a whole lot of knowledgeable people in the room, which is great. All right, so just a quick recap. I'm working at Amazee.io. Amazee.io is a Docker-based hosting solution. It gives you the full flexibility of pretty much whatever you can run in a container, we can host and run for you. We do both a cloud service and a dedicated service, which is the system we're actually going to be using within GovCMS itself. So what we'll talk about is a bit about the background and how this sort of works as well. So the agenda today will give you a bit of context around the GovCMS program, a bit of background, how it all has worked, how it's been running for the last few years, an introduction into Lagoon, the build and deploy system by Amazee, a bit into the migration process, how we're going to go through that, and then lastly we'll touch base on a demo and hopefully answer any questions you might have about the program. So to get started, GovCMS. So it was a program that launched about 4 years ago. There was a big review in Australia for looking for a centralised solution across all government content management systems. They looked at a bunch before actually finally deciding on Drupal. Once Drupal was selected, they took a profile build approach, so that was a shared profile that all levels of government from federal, state and local could leverage and use to build sites. They could build and maintain it themselves in their own hosting platform, or they could use the services of the Department of Finance and actually allow them to run it as a SaaS offering. So effectively they had a full Drupal profile that they would be able to build out sites, and they didn't have to worry about the patching and ongoing maintenance, upgrades, and things like that. But they still had the flexibility to have custom themes, layouts, content types, and the like. They both have a Drupal 7 and 8 profile now. The SaaS offering is still just Drupal 7. It's almost, we're going to be launching a Drupal 8 very, very soon. So there's 238 live sites, 36 or 37 now I think in development, and 78 agencies across the Australian government that are using GovCMS at the moment. One of the most amazing things about the program is really its community of users and the uptake within the government. There's a really strong leadership team in the Department of Finance that really drive the community across the government. They have a fully public roadmap, and very much a collaborative process in their development. So any agencies that can come up and provide their feedback and ideas of the roadmap of the program going forward. They regularly have mega meetups, which are big events where people come and work on issues and improvements to the actual profile. a very active Slack channel where all the GovCMS developers are able to talk, ask questions, help users, help beginners, and answer questions. And the great thing is they're not only government developers, they're also developers in agencies of all levels. So it's a really, really healthy community, I guess, based on a bit like the Drupal community as well. So some of the features of the GovCMS profile, it's obviously a shared profile that is fully compliant with Australian government processes and security measures. It is really adaptable. They manage it all for you, so all the patching, all the updates get applied on the SaaS side of things, and everything is backed up. Everything in the SaaS profile is backed up and fully audited. It's IRAP certified platform and program, so pretty much a turnkey solution for a lot of government agencies that need that extra security. One thing to note is that it is both a SaaS program and a PaaS program. So the differences are really is you either take the profile, all the features, modules completely as they are without any customizations, and you have the ability to override the theme and make changes in that method. But as soon as you need to customize, custom module, any custom code, you're really dropping into the PaaS world of things, which means you've got to actually maintain and update your code base. Yeah, question?
Well, the acronyms, ICT, but SaaS and PaaS, what is ICT?
ICT? Yes, so that just means that they basically have to review it themselves. So any changes, any customizations, they have to review, whereas in a SaaS side, it all gets upstream in the profile and managed by the GovCMS program itself.
Software as a service, platform as a service, ICT stands for, what does that stand for?
So that's the agency's IT, information communication technology team that they need to review it themselves. Yeah. So every agency usually has a team and they review it themselves. Yeah. So, but it's one of the issues in the program as well is that a lot of these SaaS sites they do want just slight differences. It's not major differences. They're just wanting basically the main profile and a couple of extra modules or tweaks to that. And the issue there is that at the moment they are forced to sort of take ownership of the whole process if they do need that one little change. So the RFP process, which happened earlier this year, it is a contract that goes out to tender every 4 years. Just due to its size, every 4 years it must be up for review. Even the incumbent needs to resubmit the tender as well. So it was a 5-month process, and after that, Salsa Digital, which is a digital agency based in Melbourne, Australia, along with Amazing IO as their backers, were awarded the contract. Yes, sorry. Question?
Somebody else had it in 2014?
Yes. So yeah. So the way this works, I guess Salsa Digital is really taking on the application support process around the profile. They're Drupal specialists, and Amazing IO are taking over the hosting and the platform support. So the eventual result is the mix of the new GovCMS 2.0. So now we'll get into exactly what's actually changing. Basically, the new GovCMS is really about bringing in containerisation, continuous integration, and delivery, and bringing the actual SaaS and PaaS platforms back together, which means the processes, all the training materials, how developers work will all be very similar and the same. It also allows a lot more ease of development out into the PaaS land to potentially get moved back into the SaaS processes, upstreamed, and moved along. So the very, very rough overview is this picture. So it's really a case of these three technologies joining together to allow developers to push code to a self-hosted GitLab instance inside the government managed cluster. The code then will trigger builds inside or by Lagoon itself, which will build out images and deliver them and host it on OpenShift, which is also run all inside a single cluster. The benefit there is that everything within that space can be certified and controlled by the government as well. One of the biggest benefits of containerization, really, is the fact that the environments are identical. So from the moment you're in your local environment all the way through to production, you can use the exact same images. It means you can replicate any type of bugs, features. Also, improvements around infrastructure can be made in a more stable development approach, where you actually build that out in your local, test that out, test it through CI in your automated testing facilities, and eventually out to production. So things like changing a PHP version and that sort of thing can be actually done all through the same development processes. And this is what really developers have been dreaming of. So Lagoon is the solution to this problem. It's an open source build and deploy system, and it really solves this problem, this issue. Developers can build locally the services with Docker and provide that exactly the same place in CI, test that out, and all the way through to production. It's very much an API first project, built around the idea that you'll have customers with users, projects and environments that are managed within Lagoon, and then it allows for a very easy integration with third-party systems. So for the case of GovCMS, we're integrating with Gitlab, as well as a new admin UI, which is coming as well. So a bit about the container image approach. I know a lot of you are aware of Docker and how that works, but just to touch base on this, the way this program is going to work is really central to this container approach. So all of the GovCMS distribution will now be containerized and out into microservices. So these container images are very lightweight packages to run your operating system, your libraries, and your code as well. The process of building an image, if you're not aware, with Docker, it really is about layers. So we start off with a image of Alpine operating system, which is very, very lightweight, and was really built for the Docker container world. What happens is, on top of that, we add the application libraries, any dependencies for the code. So in this case, if we were building out, say, a Drupal web server, we'd be adding in PHP, which is a required runtime for Drupal. And lastly, on top of that, we add in the actual Drupal container, Drupal application code, which will be used to run and serve the site. So the great thing about containers is really the fact that these are blueprints that can be scaled up very, very quickly, and we can easily have multiple containers running at the same time to serve traffic to end users. So with that approach, we build that out, the very static, the same containers that get tested through CI, approved in QA, can then get very easily, quickly created within milliseconds often to build out new versions and scale up, which is good. The way we built Drupal is broken up into microservices. this allows those individual services to scale up. So you can see here we actually have separate services for CLI tools. Means that we can have a bit more bloat in there because that'll run services like Drush, things that aren't needed in a front-end service. Then we have a very much like an Nginx pod, which is your public front end, as well as breaking out to caching services and search. The great thing about breaking that up as well is it means that later on we can actually move that and change that with different services as we need to. So it leads on to the big one here, which is really about using Kubernetes and leveraging this pretty big open source project that's now sort of taking the world by storm. This will deliver a lot of these great features such as auto healing, scaling, very much high availability structure. So within this concept here, we've got 3 worker nodes. We can have multiple pods or containers running on any one of those nodes, and they can talk together. OpenShift itself is a Kubernetes distribution. It is supported by Red Hat and has a stable, which gives it a stable upgrade path. They also backport patches for older releases, so it's a lot more stable. Yeah. So, what does that all mean for GovCMS? GovCMS 2.0. So, a quick comparison with what we currently got. So, for scaling, obviously it was an issue where it was very much a manual process. It required planning and approvals, and it took time. Whereas now we're actually able to automate a lot of this stuff. So for sites themselves, we'll often have autoscalers, which means that demand will actually launch extra containers if we need to. That elasticity just means that we can actually bring up extra capacity when required. So, for example, during the daytime, we'll obviously have a lot more capacity. With government sites, they do get a peak during the day, and it often cuts off at night time and over the weekends. Kubernetes brings that high level of fault tolerance. It's pretty much built to fail, so any one of those components can fall over, shut out, network outages, and it should be able to auto heal itself. The new version does come with an automated test framework, which was always sort of an issue for customers, which had to really implement that themselves, and a lot of the times it was missed. And security is going to be a big one as well. So currently public are unclassified, and later on next year we're moving up to a different level, which is unclassified DLM. The last big one, just obviously, it's completely open source platform where it wasn't before. The stack, it'll be running in AWS Sydney. The cluster is going to be spread across all 3 availability zones that are there at the moment, and we're going to have auto scaling both pods, so that's the pods inside each project will scale up, and the nodes themselves. So, like we said before, we'll be able to provision extra capacity as required, but also just monitor the cluster and basically get a lot higher density out of the compute base there. So, like I said before, around base images, the actual profile itself will now be releasing the code or the profile in official base images. They'll have a code image, a PHP image, a web image, Nginx, and a bunch of other services, which means it's a lot easier for the profile itself. It's got a reference architecture to actually be able to build and test all the functionality within the project. But it also means that all the other sites that build from it will be able to leverage from all of the base containers that come from the profile. It moves a lot of the testing and processes upstream, so that can be controlled and managed centrally before it ever reaches any sites in the wild. So it's kind of a wildly different approach to multi-sites that have come before, where it's very much similar, where every single site will have a common code base here. They have a common parent with a common base image. However, the end result means that each site can build and maintain their own version and can upgrade and change as they need to. One thing to note was we have a special test image in place, which is going to be an official test image, have all of the test dependencies within the project that will be served along with the project, but not ever deployed out into production. So it means that a lot of the developers can just leverage these testing infrastructure of the project and share with that. So the new SaaS system, it'll look very much like this, where you can see that this is building out the code-based image, but there's not going to be any Drupal code in a repository. It very much starts from the official base image, and they can copy in their theme into the site, and that's it. So this is from a pure SaaS implementation where they only have the ability to add in custom themes, and what we've got in place is a validation process through CI that will confirm that nothing else is sort of coming in when it shouldn't. We've also got auditing process that will ensure that as well. So from here, this is where it's going to get interesting in the future, is because what we can do is offer the concept of, like they're calling it like a SaaS plus, but it's also where it's sat on the PaaS spectrum in previously. So here you can basically say, I want one extra module, and I'll copy that module into my code base as I need to, where I don't need to have to worry about managing a whole code base, and I can still leverage off those base images that get patched and updated and managed centrally. So things like Drupal get-in or big security issues, you would, if you're just copying over and managing a very minimal integration point, all you need to do is actually really rebuild your project. You don't actually need to touch the code. All the code comes from the upstream and it's been previously tested. So hopefully that'll give a lot more flexibility in the way people build and maintain their customizations. One of the critical components of this is really around continuous integration. I don't think this process would work very well without it. So it really means that every time we do make a change, we want to test it thoroughly to make sure that there's no regressions. And that's the only way this would really works effectively, when you've got this model of a base implementation and then you're extending it. Because every extension there has its own challenges and changes that need to be tested. So through the integration, continuous integration process, we're leveraging Gitlab runners, and all the developers will basically push code to GitLab. This will trigger a pipeline. The validation process will take place. A build process will take place to make sure that exactly what you've changed is not going to affect any part of the build. And eventually the deployment, where that'll be passed to Lagoon, and Lagoon will be managing the deployment out to a production environment. Testing, like we said, it's going to be critical, and also what we can do is leverage this upstream. So these tests that are already part of the profile and managed on a day-to-day basis can be extended by your project and run effectively every time you go and deploy. We've also built the ability to extend those tests within the SaaS sites themselves. So they can easily add, for example, BHET and PHP unit tests to the code base without even having to maintain the actual BHET or PHP unit. So they effectively just write the tests, drop them in a directory in the repository. Again, all the actual processes and everything is happening upstream in a centralized fashion. So, like we said before, the scaffold validation is going to be critical for SaaS. We have a certification process which takes it all the way up to the application, and that means that everything that gets added to the profile needs to be done through a certification process and being mindful of what effects that may have in terms of security. So for the SaaS components, there'll still be a validation process of the code base, but like we said, greater flexibility if you do decide to move over to a PaaS. We're using Drupal, which is a great system developed by a local developer in New Zealand. It's an auditing tool, and we do nightly builds on all of the projects to determine if anything has changed more from configuration in a database that shouldn't be. So an example would be caching has been disabled in a production site. This will pick up and tell us exactly what's gone on. Like I said before, the dedicated test image, it just means that this can be really bloated as well. I mean, the projects, they can really heavily extend this because this never actually makes it into a production environment. So it's only run through the local and the CI environments. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. One of the major benefits of Lagoon and the way that every single branch can be essentially a production artifact, and this gives us this branch-based environment approach. And the way this will work through CI is every time a branch is built and pushed, it'll trigger the CI process, the validation, to make sure everything is all good. The last step will essentially create a QA environment in the production environment to validate that whole process has worked. This will need to take place for every change. Sorry. This will need to take place for every change, just to ensure that it's not going to be breaking anything. It also means that there's a QA process. Someone has to approve those changes before they ever make it into a production environment. And the great thing about Lagoon and with this containerized approach is that all of these environments are essentially identical. They are production-ready artifacts. They could be converted to production if we needed to. They're identical. And one of the really cool things that GovCMS has done is they're true believers in open source. They've been definitely brought into the idea that this is the way to go, especially for government. And one of the great things in this project is it's given us the ability to extend Lagoon in ways that, this is always a very much asked for feature, but they've given us the ability to work and make sure that new features get added to Lagoon, which can benefit the wider community. So other users of Lagoon will obviously pick this up. It's pretty new. We've got a beta release out, I think, this week. But we've got to thank GovCMS for giving the opportunity to bring these sorts of features. And that's we're just getting started. This is really, we haven't actually gone into production just yet. It's coming in the next couple of weeks. But we've got most of the migrations are complete. It's production ready. We're just waiting on the final security sign-offs and things. But this is a 3-year project. They're bought into the whole idea of open source. The community is really excited about all the challenges. I mean, they've been really great at pushing the Drupal side of things, and now they have the ability to actually provide platform enhancements as well. So it's the end-to-end solution that the whole community can gather around and offer. So. Lastly, I thought I'd just touch on is around the migrations, which is obviously a challenging aspect of any migration process when you re-platform. And I'd just talk about this, probably have a whole talk, and just to mention that there is a talk at Drupal South coming up in December, specifically about this. So just to touch on it, what we've done is we decided to fully automate the migration process. This completely lowers the risk. So it's all running through AWS, and it's a system which essentially a UI for Ansible, and it means that they are able to essentially run the migrations themselves, and they're very much a one-click process. So you set up the source, the target, some of the information around the domains, the project names and things, and hit go, and that does everything end to end. It'll copy the code base across, migrate the database, all of the files. It actually removes any modules that were coming from the old platform and installs a couple of new ones, just that replace it because the other ones were very platform specific. And then automatically creates the repository based on the scaffold, deploys that out, and is able to run through that CI process as well to ensure everything's all good. So a quick look at, this is AWS. You can see here it's just effectively a task runner. End to end, you can actually see how that processes and what that's doing. They're able to launch that themselves, manage it themselves, which is really good. So the Department of Finance will work with their clients and go through the UAT process. If they ever need to do a content refresh while they're doing testing, which they're doing right now, they can do all that themselves. So that leads on to the last bit, which is really about the demo. We can show you the process of how this is working. So I can launch this up here and quickly explain. Pause. So we'll quickly explain what's going to happen. This is showing sort of that end-to-end process of how a developer will make changes in the new system. So to quickly explain, they have their own, like I said before, own version of GitLab. So it's specific to them. Each site themselves will have their own repository. This comes with branch permissions and everything, and the security it's set up that needs to happen per site on a per site basis. It's very similar. A developer is able to build this repository out locally, and this uses Docker Compose to build that out. Pulls down all the images, and you can see here this is the actual GovCMS site that's being built out locally. What we've done, we've already deployed this site here. So this is actually the remote site that's running in Lagoon. We're going to quickly just show how we'd actually make an update.
Is that website available? Is it accessible?
Docker. This particular one here, no. This is your local environment? Correct. Yeah, so...
Is it like on your local computer, or is it only available through the VPN of the MSC or company website?
So this one here, what we're looking at here, is very much your local machine. You'd run Docker locally, and you run Docker Compose to build out the project. And this domain is actually just a loop back to your local machine. So yeah, so you'd have to build it on each machine to actually be able to replicate this. But this is a typical developer process, so they are able to actually develop, change the code, and test it locally. Yeah. So yeah, so this the docker.amazing.io is the local side. On the other side was the remote side. So what we're doing here is we're just making a small CSS change so it's very visible, changing that background color. We push that change up, and as you can see, that automatically triggers this build process. This is the one we talked about. So the first step is really around the validation that'll take place. That'll make sure that the scaffold files are in a state they should be. The next step is going to be the build process, which is taking place now. Sped up a little bit, but we actually rebuild this whole local environment in CI in an identical fashion and run those same tests across the board. The last step there is going through and actually doing a deployment. So once that green tick happens, it'll trigger Lagoon to actually deploy the project out to the live site. So this here, you can see that triggers happened, builds happened, and we've been able to push code from one to the other. Anything that broke in the middle there, if that build process failed for any reason, you'd be able to replicate that identically in your local environment, run exactly the same command, and see the same problem. So it makes it very, very easy for developers. Cool. So quickly, we'll jump into that's it. We'll go into a bit of Q&A if we have time. So thank you very much, and I can definitely show some more. But do we have any questions? Yep, sorry. Yep.
First of all, is there a microphone for the questions?
Yes, I'll repeat them. Oh, yep.
So, if most of the code is in containers, what actually lives in the individual site repository?
Okay, so the question was, if most of the code lives in containers, what is in the code repositories? So it's essentially just your customizations. So in the case of the SaaS site, it's really just a Drupal theme, for example. So that's the part that doesn't live in those upstream containers. So that's the bit they manage. And that gets injected into the container as another layer at the very end. So, yeah, but also other things are tests specific to that website. Any other site-specific code that they want to run. Yeah.
But then for the PaaS model, it could be more than just custom theme, it could also be custom modules if necessary.
Correct. So this is where the paradigm is shifting from the traditional architecture, which was very much a multi-site, didn't allow any of those additional customizations. So this is what we talked about. The SaaS Plus approach could allow a custom module to be extended up on top of these base images. So it's not only themes, but we could allow custom modules. And what they have been talking about is a process of whitelisting some of these modules that would be allowed to be injected into a SaaS site, for example. The reason they've got to be a bit careful there is that they control and support and maintain all of this. So for any security updates that take place, they've got to go through and test and upgrade and make sure all of those modules are still working. Okay. Yeah.
Is there any site downtime during the
So it depends on the
Question?
sorry. Yeah. So the question was, is there any downtime during the deployment? It does depend on what is happening. Ideally not, because with Kubernetes it allows for a rolling deployment process, which means that all of the new pods will set up and pass their readiness checks before any of the old will be destroyed. However, I guess anyone who's worked with Drupal sites, if there are serious database updates and things that need to take place, user-generated content can get affected during that small update window. So can't say absolutely not, but it's as good as we can get, really. Yeah.
Maybe to add to that,
Yeah.
one of the ideas that GovCMS has, they want to do full green Lagoon deployments, which is not something that Lagoon supports right now, but if they ever will implement it, it will contribute to that. So then the idea would be that you set up a whole new environment where you all get the checks, and you maybe access it, check if everything works, and then at one point you just switch the traffic internally to the user. Then it would be completely done.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just repeat that to say the idea was that the GovCMS are looking at a full sort of blue-green deployment model, which means that the full deployment database updates would happen in a separate environment before switching back over, which is an interesting approach to things, and it's something they've actually done in the past. So, yeah. So, anything else? Yeah. Sorry.
If someone's interested in trying out Lagoon, how do they go about doing it?
Okay, the question was, if someone's interested in trying out Lagoon, how do they go about doing that? Luckily, we've got a booth just in the hall there, and we'll be welcome to give you a bit of a demo. I'm happy to give you, a bit of a clearer demo for anyone who's technically interested in how some of the build processes work, as well as the deployment for GovCMS. So, just let me know. Yeah, sorry.
When putting PHP containers, are you able to actually share the same code, code hash, or any of that stuff between sites on one platform, or each site is separate?
So the question is, are we able to share code between containers? And the answer is yes, because the way Docker works is the
Opcode hash of PHP.
opcode. Between each one. No, unfortunately.
But it's
Sorry.
87.1, and you can actually just keep it.
Yeah. And the way Kubernetes works in a cloud-native environment, you can't guarantee where it's going to be running. This is part of the issue. But a lot of the code, because of the base images approach, is essentially shared across every single node within that container. Yeah.
What other governments have used code that routine developed besides Australia? Is there governments say India or South Africa or local state governments in Canada or the United States?
So I know a lot of governments do use Drupal, but sorry, repeat the question. The question was how many other governments are leveraging Drupal? GovCMS itself, specifically.
Pretty easy, and also Salsa Digital.
Yeah.
How many other federal or state, provincial, local governments have used your code in Downtime to make spaces?
I don't believe I've heard of anyone. So the question is how many other countries are using GovCMS? I'm not aware of any others myself, but I know there are a few other projects out there like DEGov, which is a similar profile for I think it's the German government. Yeah, and from the looks of it, it does have a lot of similarities.
Parallel projects being developed in there.
Yes, and I believe that's Drupal 8. So the challenge has been that the project has been on Drupal 7 for a while. They are now just working on a Drupal 8 release, and the idea that they're going to try and break this up into more of a component-based approach, which means they can share with others as well, a lot easier.
The problem is they don't really know because there's no way to track. If you download the GovCMS from the GitLab repository and use it on your own site, they specifically opted in to not change anything going forward. So you will not know if the site actually uses the GovCMS distribution or not. I think there are some other sites in Australia that choose to use it as their base because they have a lot of higher security and that stuff. But there's no tracking mechanism.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to know it's actually so much.
Yeah. And it's been talked about even, within Australia as we've been going around, is that really, I mean, if the Drupal 8 version was more generic, it means that even non-government processes could take place and have this concept of the base images and sharing. One of the things within Drupal Get In that came up recently is that it's amazing how we're all sitting there waiting for that patch to come out, and we all have to apply the same patch to the same code base at the same time. And it seems a bit bizarre in this open source world where we all sort of have our forks essentially. They're not forks if you don't hack core, but we all have to do the same thing at the same time. So this is a far more efficient approach to sort of patching that upstream, pulling that upstream, deploying that out. So hopefully one day maybe that could actually be non-government use case or approach to utilize this. So, any other? Yeah, at the back.
For the public program, how much of that impacts what Daisy does, and if so, how do you engage with that?
So the question is, for the public roadmap, how much does that impact what Amazee does? We're yet to see, which is kind of the exciting part. What hasn't happened or hasn't had the opportunity in the past is really they haven't had the control of the platform side of things. So they've been very much restricted to what they can do in the Drupal, in the application side. So we're yet to see what will happen there. But I think because a lot of these things like local development environments, the CI testing tools and processes, all of these things now will be shared between all the agencies. It means that they'll be able to provide feedback, look for other tools, more efficient ways to do things, and we're yet to see how that will impact on the roadmap. But I'm excited to see what will happen because once you get a good community of people, you often have really good ideas, and now we have the ability to implement them. So I'm excited.